Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today, I'd like to talk about corruption. Corruption has become rampant in Zimbabwe. In 2017, the gentleman we can see on the screen there was one of the soldiers who staged the military coup in November 2017. And one of the reasons they gave for staging the coup was that they were removing corrupt individuals who had surrounded the president. And Mnangagwa, as incoming president, the blessing of the coup, one of the things he promised was that he was going to stamp out corruption. But the truth of the matter is, he did not. Corruption in Zimbabwe has become rampant. And our friend there, S.B. Moyo, in the post-coup period, he was to become Minister of Foreign Affairs, and some of his colleagues, including Chiwenga, who was the commander of the army, resigned from the army to become the vice president. And a few other soldiers took up key positions. And the corruption went into overdrive. Corruption in Zimbabwe has become rampant. But today I would like to tackle corruption from a slightly different angle. And I would like to play this little video clip of corruption, problems of corruption.
Africa's politics have fallen into the hands of elites, as these people just do what the colonialists did, which was suck the wealth out and shift it overseas. World Bank says between 60 and 70% of Africa's capital shifted out of the continent. It's in banks in Europe. So there's this mentality which I think has allowed a very small group of people to take over those countries politically, but also economically. And until that changes, that is, until there's a new generation or even a revolution that actually takes power back to African people, I think those problems, that lack of development, will continue.
Welcome, Benjamin. What do you think of this problem of corruption?
Thank you for having me on the program. Corruption is like a disease. Once it sets in, and once the rot sets in, it's difficult, to cover it up. I think the only solution to it is to actually, amputate. It's like, gangrene, rot. You just have to amputate. And I think this is what this gentleman is trying to say. It's about the amputation. That's the only way we can get, Africa back to its rightful place, which I believe, it's way up there, given, the resources, the vast resources that are within the continent itself. So, coming back home to closer to Zimbabwe, I mean, this gentleman, when you gave an introduction to say, they came through and their statement was, they were trying to protect President Mugabe from the criminals that had surrounded him. And from that, you would think, criminals were the corrupt, elements around him. But like you said, it turns out now that it was actually child's play compared to Mugabe's era. Right now, it's in serious overdrive. And I think, like what the gentleman said again, it needs to be cut. We need to cut that rot out.
Yeah, it is tragic. But the other aspect that some people sometimes forget is a problem with corruption is that it actually drives away the competent people. Just like our political system has become, some people call it dirty politics. The problem with dirty politics is that you are driving away the competent ones. And you're leaving the field to the dirty players. So instead of the politics being cleaned up, it becomes even more dirtier than ever before. You've got to be a politician. And therefore, then you end up with a situation where the politicians are all thugs. The same thing with corruption. Corruption drives away those people with talent. This gentleman here, I think, explains that point, and I would like you to just listen to it.
JJ, I think most people have mischaracterized the true cost of corruption. I don't think the true cost of corruption, rather, let me say it differently. I don't think the most expensive line item in the cost of corruption, right, is what it's done to the economy. I think it's what it's done to sentiment and what it does to talent. In other words, when you corrupt a system, those less deserving get opportunities to which they are not deserving.
Entitled.
The problem is that those who are deserving pick up a little green document called a passport. They get on a plane
and go elsewhere.
And they leave. Now, there are some people watching this who go, no, they must go. Let me tell you why that is the dumbest, most nonsensical thing I've ever heard people say. When you say, JJ must go, JJ is born in South Africa. The South African state educates him for 18 years to get his matric. Then, that same South African economy has built institutions of education. Let's assume JJ gets a master's. It's another 5-6 years of it. 24 years invested, and you're going to say he must just go.
Yeah,
Like,
because you're just flushing that investment down the drain.
And so, what's happened now, if it's not the semigration to the Western Cape, that's a separate conversation altogether. It's the proper immigration. The number of South Africans who have sat in this chair living in Canada today would alarm you. The number who've moved to Australia would alarm you. The number I bump into, or neighbors of mine in the Middle East, will alarm you, right? Because what talent does, when you distort this thing about effort versus reward, is talent goes where it will be rewarded.
My goodness.
It doesn't have to put up with the nonsense. It gets on a plane and it leaves.
That point cannot be denied. I think in Zimbabwe we have had now corruption. It has reached such level that to get a job, you have to know somebody. To get any contract, you have to know somebody, and you've got to pay them off. And this has got the double edge that those who are being rewarded with the corrupt system, as the first video clip showed, invariably they do not invest the money wisely. They either spend it on luxuries, or some of them ship it outside the country. And then the talented ones, they do not have to put up with that kind of system. What do? They leave the country. So the country is being drained on both ends. And is it any wonder that we end up with a situation where The education system in Zimbabwe, for instance, has suffered. Health, the same thing. You name any field, in fact, they've all suffered because most of the really competent professionals have left the country. If they could, they have left. And those who have stayed behind, they are invariably underemployed or not employed at all. And so the country drift to the bottom is invariable. It's inevitable. And it's relentless. I honestly do not think the Zimbabweans, those who care about the country, those who care about reviving the country, fully appreciate the seriousness of our situation and why corruption is a serious problem. I don't know what you think we can do there, Benjamin. I'm at a loss myself, I must admit.
I mean, it just brings me to the idea to say, Vision 2030, upper middle income, to have a full functioning economy. And yet the borders are so busy with people exiting at every turn. The facts is, look, for example, now, long back when you wanted to be a nurse, they required for you to have, at least a minimum of 5 O levels. That included English, mathematics, and science. They have since taken away, the mathematics part and left just these two. When you try and look closer, it's not because it's not important. It's because the ones that had it have since left. So now you are just trying to fill in the gaps. And by that day, your standards are going down. So, like I always say, the preconditions for even that vision to take shape or to take place are not in place. They're not there. They are totally absent, because of corruption. I'll give you another case. There's this Mpofu and Chimombe, saga that is happening with the goats. And apparently they had not only won that tender for the goats, they'd also won to put street lights in Harare, and they never did anything. My question now is, not them only, but you got the Chivayos. Chivayo, he got a tender for ZESA to put to solar the country. He didn't do anything. But then you still find out he got more and more tenders. And he was actually bragging to say, there are more that are coming. How then do you give somebody that has not delivered or previously another big contract, another big tender? So this is where you see, like you were saying, corruption, you cannot, there are competent people out there, but they will no longer be willing to make the effort to put their tenders forward because, no one will look at it. Even if they do submit, who is going to look at it? They will only look at those that are willing to grease the hands, sorry. So by so doing, you're not only neglecting the country of getting, the best, a service delivered. You're completely wiping away those that actually can do a good job. Hence now we are stuck with the thieves at the end of the day. So it's like I said, the only way to stop this is by cutting off the rod. And corruption does not start with the young boys. Corruption starts with the adults. You know, the top chefs are the ones that are, are the most corrupt. And unless we cut off those, we're heading for disaster. We are really heading for disaster. And that gentleman was very right. Everybody is just picking up their green, booklet, and they are living. They are living in numbers. And unfortunately, I don't know how the mantra will work when they say "Nyika inoakwa newe newayo," when everybody that is capable of building is living. Right? Everybody is living. How then do you expect Kwene to build? Unless he's saying he's the only guy that is going to build. It's all these things, they don't make sense. And it's for us to see.
Yeah, the tragedy actually for Zimbabwe, when we're talking of change here, is whether we like it or not everybody, even if they're highly qualified, can leave the country. There is a limit to how many Zimbabweans can find a job in South Africa, for instance, or outside in other region, in other parts of SADC and so forth. So I think there is always going to be that limit. And it's not always convenient to do so. But I think when it comes to change, this is where it becomes even more difficult. Because whether we like it or not, as long as ZANU-PF is in power, corruption cannot be stamped out. How do you get ZANU-PF out of power? Well, there are two alternatives. The one is to implement the democratic reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. And that is the path that Zimbabweans have followed these last 24 years. It has failed to deliver any change because Mugabe and now Mnangagwa has learned that the opposition can do whatever he wants them to do as long as they are paid. This cartoon of the opposition fighting over US 40,000 was the bribe opposition leaders received in November 2022. All the MPs received 40,000 US dollars housing loan, senators the same thing. Everybody could see this was a bribe. And of course, having received it, they could not complain when Mnangagwa extended the same generosity to his ministers, deputy ministers, to the chiefs, to church leaders, to judges, and so forth and so on. Mnangagwa must have spent a cool 5 billion US dollars last year to secure his re-election. One of the things about corruption is that those who are in control of it, and Mnangagwa is the godfather of it, as the documentary on Gold Mafia showed, he is able to cream off some of the looted money to bankroll his election campaigns. And now he is in such a powerful position, he can bribe everybody, from Povo with chicken and chips to, as we saw, judges, 4,000 US dollars housing loan. Deputy ministers, 230,000 US dollars housing loan. Ministers themselves got $500,000 US dollars. That is how corruption, it becomes self-perpetuating. The wealth that Zimbabwe is often boasted about having so many minerals, gold, diamonds, coal, and you name it, lithium, have become, instead of being a blessing for the country, they become a curse. Because Mnangagwa, the rampant corruption we're talking about here, that is where the corrupt are getting their money. And he is pocketing, as the godfather, some of that money. And he is using it to keep the regime in power. Change, Benjamin, I honestly think that the change is not going to be easy at all. Some people underestimate it, but I honestly think that it is not easy.
Oh yes, it's not going to be very easy. Because I honestly believe, change will only come from the people themselves, not from any leader who comes and promises all this. Our change, the change in mentality, is what will drive this forward out of this mess. Our ability to start thinking, our ability to see our country, not in the vision of just two organizations. That is the first thing. Like you said before, even if we were to present somebody that will come with, a good policy, a sound, strategy over how to get us out of this mess, people will not buy into it because their tunnel vision, the amount of propaganda that has been put in their head, they cannot see beyond Mnangagwa or Chamisa. I think as it stands in Zimbabwe, there is only two people that are entitled to rule. Those that want Chamisa and those that want Mnangagwa. And beyond that, they do not see. No matter how competent they is, even if you were to put somebody that has got the best ideas, they will not buy into it because they are blind loyalty. That's how to describe them. They will never see anything wrong in their leader. And yet, they have been taking us through winding, dead roads leading to nowhere. So it all has to start with us. Our change of mentality, our ability to now, come out of this box that we have been put and think for ourselves. That's the only way. It will not take anything other than that unless we start to think for ourselves and see the reality around us. I think it's not impossible, but very, very difficult.
Well, I'll just maybe add to that. If the electorate failed to see that the opposition have failed to implement reforms in 24 years, because that they have. The ordinary people have failed to realize that they have been electing the opposition for the primary purpose of implementing reforms. And the opposition has failed to implement even one token reform in 24 years, including 5 in the GNU. That's when you realize you've got a problem here. Some of us who have been interacting with ordinary Zimbabweans, you can tell, last year, they definitely believed that Triple C was going to win big. And they believed Chamisa when he said he was going to plug all the vote rigging loopholes. And they participated in those flawed elections. They were warned that those elections were without reforms, ZANU-PF will rig. They were also warned that participating without implementing reforms first will only give ZANU-PF legitimacy, and yet they still participated. And right now, you can tell that even a year later, very few people have actually learned a lesson from that mistake. They still have this Chamisa Chete Chete mentality, whether we like it or not. Good governance comes with a price tag. You need an electorate that is educated, knowledgeable, and diligent. And the Zimbabwe electorate, no disrespect to anybody, I'm only stating the facts as I see them, are an ignorant, naive, and gullible lot. Some people get really agitated even when you ask them, would you agree that Chamisa lied about plugging the vote rigging loopholes? Why they should get agitated by it beggars belief. But you only begin to understand it. They don't want to admit it because they know they will also have to admit that they were fools to have believed it. And they don't want to admit that. And so they bury their heads in the sand and maintain that he did nothing wrong. I think there is a real danger, and we'll be making a big mistake if we underestimate that danger, that Zimbabweans will come 2028, will participate in those flawed elections in their millions. And thus make it very difficult for SADC, even if they wanted to deny ZANU-PF political legitimacy, to do so.
Yes, I agree with you to say, it doesn't take much to convince Zimbabweans to, to participate in next election, or let me just say to follow either candidate. I mean, we saw for the ZANU-PF, it just takes, a piece of chicken and chips, and this deal is sealed. And then for the Chamisa mob, it's just telling them what they want to hear. Even no matter how foolish it sounds, they will buy into the idea. So yeah, it's very, very difficult. Even though, I would say, not only did we warn them to say, we've been through this road before. We've walked this path for 24 some years. We have been doing the same thing. Why are we participating in rigged elections? We know the outcome already. Let us be realistic. Not only us, SADC told them, participating you will lose. And then within the opposition, they have said it numerous times, that the only logical thing was to what? It is. The only logical step was to withdraw. They said it, not us. They said it. They acknowledged. But because greed, takes over, they since forgotten and they're willing to do exactly what they were condemning. So it's very, very difficult. It's going to be very, very difficult because we have a population that, they themselves are not willing to change. They like the idea of change, but they're not willing to change their ways. I mean, if you look into history, MDC, the Movement for Democratic Change, was never formed for it to be a government. The idea of being a government came by popularity. They were just meant to implement democratic change. That's it, period. Do your research, do your homework. That was the honest and the first, mission that they had. And unfortunately, they have done absolutely nothing towards that end.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. And for those who were able to join us this afternoon, this evening, thank you very much for joining us. And I hope you'll do it again tomorrow as we discuss another topical issue of the day. Have a good day.